gives me great pleasure to chair this particular panel on is a nuclear weapon free world desirable? Is it feasible? In a sense, this is a kind of prize I extracted when I was asked to take part in the valedictory function. I said this is a subject to be discussed, and Mrs. Sisodia very kindly and generously agreed to it. Now, I wanted this to be discussed because after so many years, when we struggled hard for nuclear disarmament and the rest of the world was totally indifferent to it, we seem to be moving towards a situation when all those people who more or less developed the nuclear strategy for the world are now themselves realizing that a nuclear war is unfightable. And therefore, the world has no alternative but to move towards nuclear disarmament. So you had Secretaries of State, Mr. Schulz and Kissinger, and former Defense Secretary William Perry, and former Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Mr. Sam Nunn, going public, exhorting United States to move towards nuclear disarmament. And they have published a list of people who have supported them, and you will find in that list almost everybody who was anybody in developing the nuclear war strategy. So something is happening in the world, something new is happening in the world. And therefore, I thought that this is something we should take note of. And especially today, we ourselves are a nuclear power, a weapon power, even though one American author has called us a very reluctant nuclear weapon power. I think he is right. And therefore, it is necessary for us to take this development into account and consider how we should respond to it. Our own foreign minister, delivering the keynote address day before yesterday, has expressed his support to this initiative. And I welcome that. So I thought this should be the final valedictory session for this Asian Security Conference. I have great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Lubbers, who has the record of being the longest serving Prime Minister of Netherlands. Mr. Lubbers has been involved in the nuclear issue since 74-75, when as a Minister for Economic Affairs, it was brought to his notice a particular person was taking documents away from the Almelo plant in Holland, Dr. Yeku Khan. The strange thing which he has disclosed in a TV as well as radio interview in September 2005 was when Dr. Yeku Khan was detained by the Dutch authorities, he was rescued by the American intelligence, which told the Dutch authorities to let him go. And Holland, being a loyal member of the NATO, obliged. Not only then, it happened then in 1975, it happened in 1986 when Dr. A.Q. Khan again went to Holland, and he was detained by the Dutch authorities, and again there were instructions. This time Dr. Lubbers was the Prime Minister, to asking the Dutch authorities to let him go. So here is a puzzle to which of course he hasn't got the answer, and nor do we think we have an answer. What is the linkage between the CIA and Dr. A.Q. Khan? I think it should be a matter of concern not only to the rest of the world and the American public. In one sense, I would even say it should have been a matter of concern for the Pakistani authorities. I don't know how they reacted to it. Anyway, so Dr. Lubbers is going to talk to us about the nuclear issue. Of course, he is strongly in favor of nuclear disarmament. So he is going to talk to us about that. So, Dr. Lubbers.
What you told essentially is some truth in it. It's a bit romanticized. Yeah, it's true that my people detected Dr. Khan. Those days, I was a student in the Netherlands. Just finished in Delft University. That working there, he did espionage. So we ousted him. We didn't detain him. We informed, of course, the services, and they said, "Don't worry, we will follow him." And that repeated later when he came back to organize his A.Q. Khan network. This is bringing together a number of companies who had the capacity to build ultra-centrifuge. I'm not so surprised as you, because my experiences in the old days of the Cold War was that the secret services, very capable secret services, considered themselves to be the best if they followed people and found their relationships and networks. So this was not so exceptional, this instruction, if you like, to say, we are aware, we follow this, we are in charge. So it's a bit different, and I don't be puzzled too much about the connection between him and the CIA. I think there is not a real connection. And you know, the CIA is becoming more and more famous. It's not long ago they had all the evidence about the nuclear arms build-up in Iran, and more recently there was the report. No, it's a bit different. So, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. Talk more about the issue here of the conference, and start with giving a little bit more of my credentials to be interested in that. When I became that young minister for energy, we were just that far in the Netherlands that we had developed ultra-centrifuge technology for the enrichment of uranium. This was originally a Dutch finding. And we had seen similar findings in Germany and in the UK. By the way, also in Moscow. So it was more broadly known. But we were the more advanced, and we thought it was useful to partner with Germany, a non-nuclear weapon state, very interested in nuclear energy, and the UK. This became a company called Urenco, and it was based on a treaty. It's called the Treaty of Almelo. Now this enrichment is still going on in Urenco, and it's very successful. When I grew up, I knew, of course, about enrichment, that the nuclear weapon states mostly practiced another technology called gas diffusion. And enrichment by centrifuge was considered as less good. So the Brits were still in it with us, but even they had their hesitations. And the French did not respect us at all. They did it with gas diffusion, as the Americans did. Now, in the last years, we have seen a change. These two countries are now practicing the same enrichment technology. Factories are built in the States, so they are shifting out of the gas diffusion to the enrichment by centrifuge. And the same in France, even now in a phase that they are entering with a special treaty in the Treaty of Almelo. My guess is that in the future, we are now talking civil purposes, arms of atoms for peace, as we call it, that this will be mostly based in the future on the centrifuge. It's expanding rapidly at this stage. In that sense, the Netherlands is a nuclear country, not in arms, but in enrichment. So this is a connection. Now later on, as you said, sir, I was 12 years Prime Minister in the Netherlands, and this was still the time of the Cold War, in which we had our concerns, of course. So I became connected as well. By the way, in going for restrictions, nuclear arms, ultimately banning that, I was also stimulated here from India. I remember the days of Indira Gandhi. I remember his son, Rajiv Gandhi. I guess this phrase of reluctant comes from out of his mouth. So I know India with this challenge to be amongst the powerful, to protect itself, be safe in defense terms, by going nuclear for nuclear arms themselves. And at some point they declare themselves a nuclear arms state. So that's done. During the years I've lived in another situation. I'm Dutch, so I knew I was in NATO and we had nuclear arms, but not Dutch as such. I think we were one of those who, when I grew up, fully agreed with the intentions of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's useful to remind that this whole idea came from Washington after the Second World War. It was the Baruch Plan. From then we had the speech of Eisenhower, 1953, Atoms for Peace, and they tried to realize this in the UN context. Those days it was Moscow, it's the beginning of the story, who didn't trust the Americans. He said, UN is something of Washington, we cannot trust this system. So they blocked it in the beginning. That's a bit ironical in history. Now it has totally turned around, because the United States, very much in favor of this mechanism, somewhere in the 90s of last century, changed their attitude. They didn't believe anymore in multilateralism by this institution. They did not trust it anymore. And they went for a course trying to impose on countries who want to go nuclear not to do that. And you know the different countries one after another. Therefore, the Non-Proliferation Treaty started to degrade. We have seen now 2 review conferences which are failures, were failures. And we are heading for the next one. We'll see what will happen. Now, I think India in all this has its own history. And you are the experts, I'm not. For me, it was not too difficult to understand it. It is a combination of defense politics. To be secure, you need this, and you have to look only to the map. Pakistan on the one hand, and not far away China. So it's almost automatically that a government, I think an administration, has to consider this as a possibility, if not a necessity, to develop to a nuclear weapon state. And so it went on. I mean, it was very transparent, because India, for their reasons, said no to the non-proliferation treaty. They didn't cheat the non-proliferation treaty. No, they didn't become member of the non-proliferation treaty. I would say, so far, so good. It's the story of India. Now, and I'm come back to that a little bit longer, I think there is now a new situation. The new situation with the upcoming cooperation treaty with the United States and here in India. It's a new situation. A new situation by what you said about this have-beens persons who still publish and presses. It's on our tables, I think. You can reread it again. But let me take you a little bit back in history too. The NPT was not a total failure. I take you to Latin America. There we have seen the working together of Brazil and Argentina up to a level that they were very capable, and they were on, let's say, the threshold of going also for nuclear arms. And then, in their political situation, they made a calculation that it was better not to do that, so they refrained. Then I take you to South Africa. By the political situation there and the capacity, they developed nuclear technology. It's for sure that in a very short time, South Africa could develop nuclear arms. So there are examples in the world where states, relevant states, I mean South Africa is a leading nation in Africa. Brazil, don't have to say anything. Even more with its partnership with Argentina is very relevant. But still they said no, we refrain from it. Also for there, it was of course a political calculation. They thought it was better not to do it. Fine. Now, we're having this conference in 2007. The last years, there has been a discussion on the composition of the Security Council. Try to explain why I see the connection between our issue and the Security Council. Now, the P5 are not by coincidence exactly the same states that at some moment in history had nuclear weapons capability. That was the composition, therefore, of that Security Council, the P5. The reality of nuclear weapon states is not any longer the same as the P5. It's different, but we do still as if in main questions in the world, key questions, the Security Council is in charge, the P5. And I think that construct, historical construct, is one of the reasons that we are in trouble with finding our way forward of gradually reducing and ultimately banning, at the end of the day, nuclear arms and controlling the fissile material and those states who practice arms of nuclear for atoms for peace. Now my idea is that it would be good, because we tried in vain to expand somewhat the Security Council, and India certainly was a key candidate and is a key candidate. I fear it's not going to work. But my opinion, at least here, is that it would be good to invest time in what I call a Security Council Plus for this issue, the nuclear issue in the world. I consider the nuclear issue as a key issue, very important issue. In fact, for two reasons, not for one, for two. One reason is what we are discussing here, how to cope with the risk of nuclear. How can we reduce control, ultimately ban. This is one. But the other is with Atoms for Peace. Just this morning I was nearby in New Delhi at the yearly conference on sustainable development of TERI Institute. There we talk climate change, which is quite a relevant issue. Now, in the total of finding answers to climate change, we cannot neglect the role of nuclear, but now in terms of atoms for peace, for peaceful purposes. But it is a thin line in each country to practice at a certain scale atoms for peace. This is not only energy, but also medicine and agriculture and so on, which can be very beneficiary for the world and can be relevant also to address the challenge of climate change. So from that perspective, I'm in favor of practicing nuclear. But as I said, there's a thin line in the technology between the military dimension and the non-military dimension. And then I come back to this concept which was thought through originally in the Baruch plan and later in the NPT. This is to have a mechanism, not only a political deal in which the things were connected, practicing atoms for peace while reducing the risk to military, but also to instrumentalize that with an International Atomic Energy Agency which has sufficient capacity to really be instrumental in handling this problem. And here I have to add that I do think that this issue is so important that it merits a supranational approach. A supranational approach. Now, we know this a little bit. I'm European, I'm Dutch. Because there, immediately after the Second World War, a few years later, we concluded to the so-called Euratom Treaty, which plainly said we cannot get back at this stage UK and France, the two P5 members, but all the other European member states, and that is still today, also for the incoming members, should not possess fissile material. It's legally owned by Euratom. So whether this is the Dutch or the Polish or the Italians or whatever, the Spanish, it's all the ownership. Therefore, in our countries, the inspection and control on that, premises, material, checking on everything, which Euratom uses the International Atomic Energy Agencies to do that. They come together, is not experienced as a strange police or strange people coming in. It's their material. It's of them. And I think we still have to reflect on the possibility that there is supranationality given to the International Atomic Energy Agency. I go one step further. We had this awful war afterwards, one said, terrible mistake of Iraq. Yeah? I think it would have been better if the inspections by Hans Blix and his team, who after all were relatively successful, would have been supported by blue helmets on all vital places in Iraq. I absolutely convinced that Saddam Hussein would have not refused them. Just go. But you need a certain legal traditional framework that it is supranational and therefore blue helmets back up the inspections. This is the better model than the military interventions, I think. Now, at this stage we know Washington is coping with this problem in its presumed leadership role country by country. So they had a strategy for Libya, what worked out well. They had one with Iraq, which was a bit of a mistake, I guess. Then we have now Iran, we talk North Korea, Um, I have no time to go in all these, but I have a strong feeling that a main point is missed. This should not be handled by one country, how powerful it is. It should be done supranational. And therefore we cannot use the P5 to do it, to renew the construction, to cope with this double challenge, allow nuclear technology to be used all over the world, also in relation to climate change, and at the very same time have a mechanism to reducing the risks of the nuclear, especially the military dimension of that. So I've written it down, call this stalemate article. We're in a sort of stalemate. People cannot find their way, and the article you refer to is an example of that. There are more initiatives of that. You have the Middle Powers Initiative. I could mention others as well. But let me end, not speaking too long, that I think in India is a very specific situation. Why? Nobody can deny that India is a very important country in scale, in population, in capacity. I said somewhere at the beginning, therefore, for good reasons, they said India has to become member of the Security Council. I would say forget it. It's not going to happen. But concentrate on another possibility, that is the Security Council Plus format. Sit down with others. Sit down with Brazil. Sit down with Africa, South Africa. Possibly sit down with Japan would be a good idea. Invite the European Union. It's not a small thing either. That could be more effective as rhetorica in the General Assembly of the UN. And certainly it will be more effective than to rely on the P5 as if they solve the problems of the world. They will not. You need a Security Council Plus group for this issue. But when you go in that, you have to make your choices, of course. The choices is that you say, our ultimate goal is that nuclear arms are there only temporarily to protect ourselves. But we remit our commitment, renew our commitment, I would say the Gandhi statements. Ultimately, we want to ban nuclear arms. We want to get rid of it. So it's a very important Indian tradition. At some point in time, India had the leadership of the so-called Third World, the non-aligned countries. Those days, this was the credo. Now again, I think there is an opportunity to come in a position, have a sort of leadership role. Go for that. He said, we have a perspective. If others work with us together in a fair way, we can go forward. At the same time, I add to that using nuclear technology for peaceful purposes is a positive thing. And we should get rid of the idea, the less it is practiced, the safer the world it is. No, it's not true. So there is an enormous challenge. And I do think India is in a specific position also because of whatever you think about it, it's happening. This is the working together with America. But I see, please don't see this only as a political, tactical challenge to get some benefits out of it, but to resist the demands and not to give in. Permit me to say to my friends here, there is some grandeur possible in India. And it's go back to the fundamentals. List the objectives. I try to do it a little bit. And say we are not the small boy on the block. We are India. And we have this tradition. We have the capacity to the future. And we love to sit down with countries like Brazil and South Africa. What's the problem? You shouldn't say they are not relevant because they are not nuclear armed states. No, you would say they are very, very relevant, even when they did not practice it. And then you can build a coalition, and I would say include Japan. Why not? Japan, by all means, has this capacity to do it. They didn't do it for historical reasons. You never know how it will go in the future, but certainly it could be an impressive country as well to work together with. So this is something of this Security Council Plus model in relation to your topic. Thank you, sir.